This morning I need to respond to something said yesterday regarding one of your cost-saving schemes, the idea of synergy. Vice Chancellor Brooks touted the success of the model synergy program in this building and a model that's rapidly spreading throughout the system. I think she said something about $400,000 saved for efficiencies. They transferred work done here over to the Long Beach campus. I believe it was stated that this was quote-unquote painless. I must take issue with this statement. How painless was it for Amy Chung? Amy was a payroll technician 3 who was laid off last year for quote-unquote lack of work due to this transfer, and although Amy was a CSU employee, she had no right to follow that work. She has a right to be hired first if the work she was doing ever comes back to this building, which is highly unlikely. And if a position in her field opens up at Long Beach State, she can apply like anyone else, because each campus is considered a separate employer, even though we all work for the CSU. Her 10 years of service counts for little in the new corporate CSU. There is little difference from some cold-hearted CEO shipping jobs overseas, at least for Amy. We met yesterday, upstairs yesterday, to discuss your RFP on the new online university. Not surprisingly, there is no mention of staff in the presentation and no commitment to having your capable current employees perform this work. I said yesterday that I am a Luddite in the true historic sense of the term. The Luddites were not against technology per se. They smashed machines in protest of the lack of respect the workers were given in the application of new developments. Even the SACB has recognized your arrogance and double standards, but the problem isn't just the growing gap between executive pay and your custodians. The problem for us is your lack of commitment to the rest of your workforce outside of the executives. The philosopher Will Durant said, civilization should be judged by the way women and children were treated. I would up that to be the way the least among us are treated. History records the downfall of empires and great institutions. Let history record how the CSU fell. It wasn't just budget cuts, it was the way the custodians and Amy Chung's and students and faculty were treated. You obviously plan to save, quote-unquote, the CSU on our backs by privatization schemes and paying your executives with private funds while keeping your car allowances and housing and entertainment perks for the few. Just the other day, I was trying to teach my 11-year-old son a life lesson when the new ice skates he was thrilled with suddenly weren't so great because his friend got a more expensive pair. I said to him, there are people in this world who know the price of everything and the value of nothing. Your staff are not sucking the lifeblood from the CSU. We are the lifeblood. If anything sucks around here, it's your lack of commitment to your workforce and, by extension, your lack of respect for the people of California. Thank you.
My name is Joseph Dobzynski, Jr. I work at CSU Channel Islands as a programmer analyst, and I also serve as Vice President for Member Engagement for the California State University Employees Union, SCNU Local 2579. I have come to the conclusion the CSU operates with 2 sets of rules, one set for executives and campus presidents, and another for the rest of us within the system. You spent the last year discussing executive compensation, a decision that will ultimately affect 10 people in order to be competitive and attract quality talent. You are supplementing their compensation using discretionary funds from folks who most likely didn't want their donations going to executive compensation or home renovations. By contrast, we have heard about the need to make students, staff, and faculty pay more for tuition, pension, and benefits. We are told about shared sacrifice and offer feel-good events to boost our morale. I'm here to tell you that morale is not going to pay the bills, especially for our employees who make less than a year than some of you make in a month. You are all high-functioning, important people in this system. The rest of us are just automatons in the machine. You've talked about the lack of funding, which we acknowledge, but we disagree on the management of the CSU budget. If there's no money for staff or faculty, and more money is needed from the students, then there certainly shouldn't be any money for executives or the consultants that are paid to help executives make decisions. For your projects and needs, there's money. The rest of us are just line items in your budget. You said you opposed efforts to reform the CSU Board of Trustees to include faculty and staff representatives, citing that having constituents being represented on the board would not represent the people of California. And yet, looking at the makeup of this board, banker, CEO, public relations, venture capitalist, I don't see the people of California represented either. Most of my neighbors and friends, faculty members, custodians, laborers, administrative assistants, school teachers, are not represented on this board. For your preservation, there's a need to be concerned about fair representation. The rest of us are just greedy peasants. This entire crowd had to be searched prior to entering the building. Were the trustees or campus presidents subject to searches? Are the trustees or campus presidents told to not bring food or drink into the auditorium? Do you set limits on the amount of time trustees or campus presidents are allowed to speak and when? You are all able to walk through without incident and choose which rules apply to you. The rest of us are just animals you need to keep in line. Trustees, we are not animals or peasants or line items or automatons. The decisions you are making are affecting our lives. Students are forced to take on extreme debt with little hope for meaningful work. Adjunct faculty now have to decide whether to...
Sir, can you please conclude? Your time is up, and I want to preserve time for the others to speak.
I waive my time.
Boo!
I waive my time.
Give up some of your time.
I'm not on the list today? No. Okay.
I'll finish up.
Tess, you should tell them.
That's
Where
okay.
was I? Adjunct faculty now have to decide whether to pursue their passion in teaching or leave for the corporate world to make ends meet. And the staff that I and my sister unions represent have not seen a compensation increase for years while living costs are rising. How can you wonder why we are so outraged? How can you give more compensation for the wealthiest among us while the rest of us are learning to do more with less? How can you talk about programs aimed at decimating our workforce and wonder why we're upset? How can you wonder why we're outraged when students are being forced to choose between 2 or possibly 3 tiers within our own system?
Sir, please conclude. We need to preserve time for others to speak as well.
Extend the
I believe
time.
you can make a motion to extend the amount of time public comment.
I've already agreed. We're an hour late getting into the meeting, sir. I'm asking you.
Not our fault.
Can I have 10 seconds?
Yes.
Please. I'm here to tell you we're not going to take it anymore. We're not going to believe that there are no qualified candidates for executive positions that would work for a mere $250,000 per year and pay for their own vehicle and housing costs. We're not going to let you tell us we need to have shared sacrifice to supplement executive salaries and initiatives. We will be here and where you go and on your campuses and in the streets until you finally acknowledge the hypocrisy that continues to pervade the decision-making of this board. We're no longer going to abide by 2 sets of rules. Dobzynski out.
John Orr, CSUEU, Unit 7 Vice Chair. I'm a parking officer for Cal State Fullerton. I hate to belabor the point, but here we go. Last Board of Trustees, one of the newscasters asked me to speak to them, and their first question to me was, are you outraged about the new presidential salary? And my response was actually no, not really. My outrage was more reserved for some of the comments made by the trustees than it is towards the president. One of the trustees talked about how hardworking the presidents are and how much she wishes they could pay them even more. My outrage about that is I've never heard her speak about that when it comes to us. You know, trustees meeting after trustees meeting, we talk about presidential salaries and how some of them don't meet the same level as some other universities. Our salaries don't meet the same levels of other universities as well, but you never talk about that. You know, yesterday you talked about how no one's received a general salary increase in the last 5 years. I was talking about people who've been at the bottom of their salary range for 15 years. You talk about we need to share sacrifice. We know what the sacrifice is. We've been sacrificing for the last 5 years. You talk about how you've saved money by eliminating 2,000 positions. Those are our people walking out the door who have no jobs anymore. Those are 2,000 positions that 2,000 people on the unemployment line could have filled. We understand what sacrifice is. And what happens is, whether you intend it or not, this feeling that as far as the Board of Trustees is concerned, the people in these 2 rows are more important than the people in these 3 rows. And that's not right. We are just as vital as they are. The university cannot run without faculty, staff, and students. I have no issues with the president, but what I do have issue with is this idea coming from you that they are more important than us. Thank you so much for the time.